How to double your conversion rate on webinars. Hey, I'm Scott Beckford. This is a 10-minute tactical podcast that I do every week, and I dive into a topic to help you in your mortgage business. I've just done this is now a 3-part series on webinars. And in this one, I'm going to talk about conversion, and it's what happens after the webinar. And this, if you get this part wrong, honestly, I'm going to give you some stats in a couple of minutes here. It will make it way less effective. And so you do not want to miss this one. Hey, before I jump into that, I want to give a shout out to our title sponsor, Finmo. Finmo is a Canadian mortgage application, document collection, submission platform designed specifically for Canadian borrowers. It's very easy for borrowers to use. It's got some cool features. One of them being Smart Docs. It knows what document your client needs based on how they fill out the app. So as they're filling it out, it intelligently knows, hey, you're self-employed. We're going to need these documents from you. And the cool part is a lot of times when people are filling out your app, they're actually looking at their documents because they don't know the answers, just like you would do. And if you make it easy, they'll actually send you documents with the application, which saves you a pile of time. It's also connected to Lender Spotlight, which is the best tool for searching rates and guidelines. Check them out at lendesk.com/Finmo. Just get a demo, get a tour. It's the quickest way to actually understand how it works. You wouldn't buy a car without giving it a test drive. Same idea. Have a look around and see what you think. All right, so let's jump into it. So I'm going to give you 3 steps in order to get the most of your webinar. So at this point, hopefully you listened to the first two episodes I did where I talked about how to create a high converting webinar. I talked about how to fill that webinar. And now I'm going to talk about how to actually squeeze the most juice out of it. And so one of the things I've taken a ton of training on webinars over the years. I've done lots and lots of webinars, and I'll give you some stats. Then this is pretty standard. So if you get 100 people that will register for your webinar, just so you know, about 50% of them will show up. If you get higher than 50%, because a lot of people will register and go, oh, that's interesting, and they don't show up. That's normal. Don't worry about it. So if you have 100 people register, you'll get probably 50 to 60% will show up. And from that, the idea is that about half of those people, if your webinar is well targeted, about half those people will move to the next step. So back to the numbers, you get 100 people register, you get 50 people that will show up, and about half those people will qualify. And in most cases, if you can convert about 20% of those attendees into the next step, and you shouldn't be, most cases, depending on what you're offering, as a mortgage broker, you're offering the next step is a consultation. They're going to talk to someone in your team. They're going to review something. Maybe they're going to, whatever that is. But about 20, if you can average about 20% conversion from live attendees, you should be 25%. You're killing it, because that's about normal. If you get higher, cool. I've had webinars with higher before, but typically that's what you're going to see. So number one thing is at the end of that webinar, you're going to make sure that they're clear that there's a next step. So I talked about 2 call to actions in the previous episode. Go back and listen to those and make sure they know that there's a next step, because you don't want to just leave it open. Okay, hopefully this was really useful. Thanks guys for attending, and it's like, okay, what's next? You should, as a salesperson, the goal is always to sell the next step. You may have a plan in mind that your ultimate goal is to find the right client, educate them so they go, oh, build that trust. Then they go, maybe I should talk to you. You get in a conversation. You realize you can solve their problem, move them along, and you end up helping with a mortgage. But you're not trying to sell that from the webinar. All you're trying to do is sell the next step. And in most cases, it's going to be some kind of a consultation or application or something. And so the end of that webinar must be clear on the call to action. The next step, so that's step 1. If you leave it open-ended, you're just going to drop off your conversions. The second thing is you need to follow up within 24 hours. Now, you do not need to follow up necessarily. I mean, great if you could phone everybody, but maybe you can't do that. Maybe that's not practical in every case, but you do want to make sure that you're following up. And so that's important. And then the third step is to create at least a 21-day nurture program where you are inviting them to take the next step. And so I'll tell you what we're doing right now. So we have, through our brokerage, we have this White Bricks pages, which talks about our brokerage. People will come to those pages, and then they're going to get, hey, thanks for attending. They're going to get a 21-day nurture program from us. And it's basically every few days we send out, I think it's like 7 emails or something. And each of the emails talks about a pain point that was identified from the webinar, and then how we help solve it, and then another step to a call to action. So it's like, oh, this person had this problem. If I think about a first-time buyer, I'll put it in that context for you, because most of you, that's what you're going to do, something first-time buyer investor. It could be tell a story about one of your investors in that email, and then, hey, if you want to take the next step, book a call with us. And so what you're doing is you're using those stories as a way, that's what I find to be the most effective anyway, as a way to get them to take the next step, which is have a conversation. And so I within 24 hours, you got to send them something. Usually I send something quicker than that. It's within an hour, they'll get, hey, thanks for attending. What we'll do is, because it's a pre-recorded webinar in our case, we'll actually send them the link to the recording once after they've registered, so that if they've missed it, they can go back and watch the recording. And that's another way to increase conversions, because sometimes people just can't make that time work. So anyway, the next step after that is you have to follow up right away. And then the next is to actually put them on a drip campaign of emails. And then at the end of that 21 days, then you move them into a longer term nurture campaign where you're sending them something once a month. Because maybe, again, mortgages are the type of thing where people, it's not like it's an impulse item where they're going to purchase it and buy it like, oh, I just throw this in my cart. I'm going to get a mortgage today. It is something that people have to get when they need it, which is, typically every 3 to 5 years. And so it's important to make sure that you put them in some kind of a long-term nurture program after that. So, but step 1 is make sure there's a clear call to action. Step 2 is make sure you follow up within 24 hours. And step 3 is put them in at least a 21-day nurture program, and then move them into a long-term program after that. And I'll walk you through what we do right now. So what we do with our, and you can, in terms of what type of follow-ups you can use voicemails, you can use text message follow-ups if you've added phone numbers to your webinar. You can use email. Email for sure, everybody should be using email. If you want to make it a little bit more advanced, you can add in voicemail drops as well as text messages. And so this is something we've been experimenting with, and it's been working pretty well, is that we'll also do a voicemail drop, which is a recorded voicemail. Hey, and if you're listening to this, and if you've gone through my webinar, you're like, wait a second, that was a voicemail drop. Yeah, everybody does it. But the whole point is to get somebody on a phone call. And so we do a voicemail drop, and then what happens from there, and we'll send a text message within 24 hours and say, hey, I see you attended the webinar. I'd love to jump on a call, answer any questions. And then from there, the idea is to move them into the next step. That's a bit more advanced. And so if you're just starting out, maybe you don't, because I didn't start with that. That was something I learned from a friend of mine, but you don't need to start with that. But for sure, the very bare minimum, you need to be adding in emails as part of the sequence. And so hopefully you find that helpful. And I would encourage you to go back and listen to the previous 2 episodes where I talk about how to put the webinar together and how to make it converting, and then how to fill it. And then the last thing I'll say about this whole webinar thing is that I was talking to a broker the other day, and I said to her, if you had and I love this question actually, and if you want to pause and think about your answer to this question once I ask it, I call it the finger snap question. And I don't remember where I heard it. It's not my question. Like most of the ideas I get, I learned from somebody. And I try to give people credit, but sometimes I just forget, frankly. But this is such a great question. The question is, if you could snap your fingers and one problem in your business would instantly go away, but everything else remained the same, what would that problem be? And what happens when you ask that question is you identify the constraint. Most of the time, we already know. Like we're not dumb. We know that there's something's not working right. But we always feel like there's 100 things to fix. But like, how do you decide if it's like whack-a-mole, which mole do you actually hit? That's the one you hit. And so I had asked her this. I said, what is it? And she said, it's getting more higher quality leads. And I'm like, okay. And then we started talking about, diving into this. Well, so where are your leads coming from? Is there a certain source of leads that are better than others? And identified, okay, the Facebook leads are not that great, but past clients and realtor leads are much better. And then I said, well, then what is your best idea for generating more leads? And she said, I want to do a webinar. And I'm like, great. Okay. Let's see, we're moving from a vague idea of a problem, or lots of problems, to one problem, which is the one you finger snap would love to go away, down to, okay, it's this. Then I identified what's already working. So what I call the bright spot in the business, which is, this source of business, past clients and my realtor partners are great. Cool. Now, what's your best idea? And it was webinars. Then it was like, I'm like, what's your topic? Was the next question. She said, well, my topic is either first time buyers or investors. And so she was not sure what she should do. And I said, why don't you survey your clients and ask them? And then I'd actually never thought of this before because I haven't done it. I'm like, this is a good idea. So I said to her, why don't you send an email to your whole list and say, hey, I'm looking at doing a webinar. Which of these would you find the most interesting? Give them 2 titles. They're going to give you feedback. It's also kind of like have you seen the new Deadpool and Wolverine movie? I mean, they promoted the heck out of that before that movie came out. And you're promoting your webinar before it even comes out. It doesn't mean you're not even going to you could still do both. But what happens is by doing that is you actually prime people for starting the conversation. Then the second thing I said is also do that as a poll. So on your social accounts or whatever, ask people, get feedback, and then you can use that as a way to prime. And then when you finally have the webinar planned, go back to that post, especially if it's a social post, and drop in and say, hey guys, thanks for your feedback. here is a link to the webinar that, based on what you said, here's what we're going to do. And now you're driving people back there again. So I thought, man, so if I was to do a webinar, well, I will start using this. You will notice that I will start doing this going forward because I think it's bloody brilliant. And I think it's important. You can use that as a way to prime it. But in any case, the finger snap question is a really valuable one for you to use. I'll go back to that whole thing. I went on a bit of a tangent today. This is my ADD, right? So the whole purpose of this particular podcast, though, was to talk about making sure that you can convert your webinar. So remember, good call to action, right? That you've got to tie that at the end so that they know something's coming. At least follow up within 24 hours, and then at least a 21-day, some kind of a nurture campaign, whether it's a combination of emails, voicemails, texts, phone calls, whatever you want to do. Phone calls are the best. Most of you are not going to do it. I can tell you to do it. I know you're not going to. I don't do it most of the time. So I know I should. It's like, oh yeah, I should do that. I don't. You're probably not going to either. So, but if you wanted to get the highest conversion, that's what you do. Most of you won't do it. And the busier you get, the less likely you're even going to do that. And then the last thing, the piece in there is I would just say this whole finger snap question, use that as a way to identify the problem in your business. Hope you find this useful. If you do, please do me a favor. Go follow me on Instagram. I'm trying to build up my social accounts. I didn't do that for the first 10 years I did a podcast. I'm just starting now. And leave a review for this show. I really appreciate it. Anyways, thanks for listening. I'm Scott Peckford. And as I always say, there is no problem in your mortgage business that hasn't already been solved. Your problem is who's got the answer. Hopefully this podcast gives you some of those answers. Thanks for listening, and I will see you on the next show.